we have a very ancient text, Shatapat Brahmana, which says that right at birth, a person has 5 debts or obligations. Debt to the gods, debt to the sages, debt to the society, debt to the ancestors, and debt to the parents. I was very struck, really, even as a teenager, if I owe debt to the sages. Are sages only those who were born in India? That's not the implication. So from my point of view, why would I, for example, I raised this question here. I was born in India. In the present global culture, are the sages for me only Indian? Why not Socrates or Christ or Lao Tse or Rumi? Quite early in my life, I had this question arising in me. So I was born a Hindu. Personally, I will be very sad if I die merely a nominal Hindu without contacting with Sanatan Dharma, which is the label that the Hindu tradition actually associates with the word Hindu. I think I don't need to go into this again, but neither the word Hindu nor the word India are of Indian origin. They are all imposed on the tradition. From the Hindu point of view, their religious tradition is Sanatan Dharma, eternal order, which is the call by all the great sages everywhere. Personally, in my own case, I have been more assisted by Jean de Salzman of Christian background living in France than by any guru in India. So why do I owe debt only to the sages in India? The same question really for all of you to raise. From my point of view, this is really obvious that eternal wisdom is not Eastern or Western, not Hindu or Christian, nor American or Chinese. The wisest and the most sensitive people everywhere have searched for what is real. Eternal wisdom is transnational, transreligious, and transcultural. Of course, their expressions vary. Some dance, some write poetry, some make sculpture, some do philosophy, and some science. Each expression has its grandeur and its limitations. Also, the wisdom may not be Eastern or Western or Chinese or Christian, but we are conditioned by these cultural backgrounds. So it's important for us to see how not to dismiss our own cultural background, but how not to be wholly in that bondage, how to be able to appreciate that there are other ways to express the wisdom also differently. As I have already said, for example, the Buddha is speaking in Pali language to people of Hindu background. Christ is speaking in Aramaic to people of Jewish background. So the language itself is different, and the people who are listening to them are different. Their background is different. So in a way, the expressions then get more and more separated from each other. But again, some of these things I have said so many times, expression of reality is not reality. Expression of truth is not truth. In a way, it's an obvious statement. So the differences are in the expressions, not in reality. And then each expression has its grandeur and its limitations. And then a reminder again and again that in this very large universe with many, many galaxies, human beings are really very small in the whole atmosphere. Now, when this psalm is written, they are not worrying about the number of galaxies, but that's really quite irrelevant from the point of view of what is being raised. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him? Smallness of oneself in the presence of the largeness of the whole, the planets. In this case, maybe even simply the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now we can add many galaxies to it. So, what is the place of human beings in general? Then, of course, one naturally raises this question about oneself. What is my place in this vast universe? Here is a simple reminder from Einstein. Human beings, vegetables, are cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. Everybody, not only us, but the whole, he says, even the cosmic dust and the vegetable, they're all dancing to this tune. Then, since this is our last day, some of these things have already been, actually most of these things have been presented at one time or the other. Some of you may have already seen them. This is the oldest text in any Indo-European language, the Rig Veda. In the beginning arose love. The word that is used is kama, and by the time of the Bhagavad Gita, the word had changed its meaning, essentially meaning erotic love or even selfish desire. Although I think I mentioned this yesterday, even there, when Krishna is expressing that he is everything, there he actually says that among selfish desires I am kama. So even he's also kama in a way. And then another verse there, from whence this manifestation, did the one intend it or did it not? The great seer in the highest heaven alone knows, and he knows not. First of all, you see here that for the highest reality, Brahma is the label, which literally means the vastness. It is neuter gender. So one would say it rather than he or she. Not because it is not developed enough to have a gender, but in a way it is not limited enough to be stuck with one gender or the other. So it's neuter is not to be understood as beneath or lower than getting one gender or the other. But genderification itself is a limitation. And
Ravi?
yeah.
Is there a gender associated with great seer?
Yeah, with great seer a gender is attached just already because there are nearly 1,000 rishis in the Rig Veda. Rishi simply means a seer or a sage. So there are nearly 1,000 rishis in the Rig Veda, and 50 of them are rishikas, female rishis. Only 50, surprisingly. But so here the reference there is that the highest seer may know it. So naturally then that becomes genderified. But here again a reminder that in the Indian tradition, ultimately the call really is not that finally I can figure it out, but that finally I can dwell in the mystery. Here alone he knows and he knows not, even that. So very much ultimately really a call that even the highest seer may not know it, but come back to the mystery. This is the next Veda. Love is the firstborn, loftier than the gods, the fathers and men. You, O love, are the eldest of all, altogether mighty. To you we pay homage. Yesterday I had quoted from Madame Blavatsky's remark that the first foreheart is eros. And again the word, more than once I've said, eros gradually needed to be changed by other words like agape and philia in the New Testament, because eros became slightly more associated with sexual love. Similarly, kama had to be changed by bhakti or prem. Practically all the remarks of Christ have the word love in them in one way or the other. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbors as yourself. Yesterday I had quoted from Leviticus and from Rabbi Akiva and from other Jewish sources to indicate that loving one's neighbor has been a very large or strong issue in the whole of the Judeo-Christian tradition, actually in the Islamic tradition as well, very much. One's own neighbor or one's own fellow searchers. Often it gets occupied with one's own fellow searchers, or even St. Paul when he says love your neighbor, especially those who are in the Christian domain, he adds this expression.
Robbie, may I ask a question?
Yeah.
Back on the first Ravindra slide, in the beginning arose love, comma. So I've heard it said that tanha is the thirst for life. So is that related to kama?
Now, tanha, actually, that's a Pali expression for the Sanskrit word trishna, which just...
Trishna. Trishna.
That's right,
Okay.
trishna. But in Pali it becomes tanha. And that can be attachment or even search or longing. So it has all of these possible meanings to this.
So would you say kama more than bhakti? Like the search. So I'm just curious. The search is, it's not a, is it a will versus desire or kama? Or is it just...
Kama, just think of this as love. Although the suggestion is that love is the dominant force for any kind of action, any kind of will.
Thank you.
I think also yesterday I had mentioned, but some of you were not here yesterday, so let me repeat, that this article that I had earlier mentioned, Love as a Cosmological Force, is now actually available. It's among about 25 articles that are there on my website. Anybody can read it or download it. My website is simply www.ravindra.ca. And there are many other articles also, but this one has just been attached there only a few days back. So this is the remark of Tagore: love is the only reality, and it is not a mere sentiment. It is the... There are many chairs there. It is the ultimate truth that lies at the heart of creation. The second remark here, again, now some of you were not there when I mentioned this. This was in 1977. I was at the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton. And at that time, Einstein's archives were at Princeton. And I was actually at that time trying to get some material about his interaction with people in India. He had met Rabindranath Tagore, had communications with Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, and Einstein was a very great admirer of Mahatma Gandhi especially. In fact, when he died, he made this remark that future generations will refuse to believe that a man of this quality actually walked on the earth in flesh and bone. This is Einstein's remark. And so I wanted to just see what I could find in this archive. So I went to see Mrs. Dukas about 3 p.m. She was the one who had been taking care of Einstein really for several decades. And she said, well, young man, I am about to go home, but here are the keys to the archives. I'll come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. Then you can tell me whatever you would like me to copy for you, I'll copy that for you. I think I told this story earlier. Some of you have heard me say this. So there, after searching here, there for things that might even get me some Nobel Prize in physics. I finally ended up actually. Einstein, of course, had written his letters in German, but they were actually translated into English by, I imagine, by these people who were taking care of the institute. And there I asked only one postcard sent by Tagore to Einstein on his birthday, only that to be copied, on which Tagore had made, actually, he was also a painter. Tagore was quite an extraordinary person, actually. Painter, musician, singer, dancer. And towards the end of his life, he decided to learn physics because after his communications with Einstein. And 3 countries have their national anthems based on his poetry. It's absolutely extraordinary, actually. So he had written to Einstein just this little postcard with a painting on one side, and that's what he wrote. To him who knows all my faults and still loves me, my salutations. Then a repeated suggestion from all the sages, there are many levels outside us as well as inside, microcosmos mirroring the megalocosmos. Subtler levels of the cosmos outside can be understood only by the subtler levels within. You need to have a corresponding instrument. The highest resides in our deepest. And this is more or less a principle of correspondence. Really, I have slightly paraphrased from St. Paul's remarks in Romans. The eyes of the flesh see the things of the flesh. The eyes of the Spirit see the things of the Spirit. And to be quite clear, from the spiritual point of view, however advanced our telescopes or microscopes may be, they are still eyes of the flesh. I think I had once mentioned here that one astronaut who had gone quite far away from the earth said, well, I didn't see any angels, so the angels don't exist. Now, should we just dismiss what Christ saw? Or what many of the other sages saw, just because this astronaut does he have the eyes of the Spirit to see the angels, or just the eyes of the flesh? So then the suggestion very much is that there are 2 in each one of us. One coming from the spiritual side, one from the material side. And it is the spiritual side, we can now call it soul, or I with a capital I, or self with a capital S, which takes on the body for its own purpose. It's not that the body takes on the soul, it's the soul that takes on the body. And the purpose is so that the body can undertake appropriate action so that the quality of the soul can rise to a higher level. Soul is personal. Your soul is different from my soul. The intention is for the soul to rise to a transpersonal level, to the level of the Spirit, which is then closer and closer to God. And these 2 words, spirit and soul, have been so completely mixed up in the Christian tradition since the 16th century, owing to several reasons, but largely writings of Descartes, who actually, you may be surprised, he equates spirit with soul and soul with the mind. Can you believe this? But this is actually the case. And of course, then one of the indication or inference from this was that the trees or the plants or nothing or animals have no mind. And then this might shock you. Certainly, Canadian government has finally actually acknowledged this. But many of the religious people from France and England said the native Canadians don't have soul because they don't have wish for personal possession, which was regarded as one property of the soul or of the mind. Therefore, they are just animals. They can be just killed. and thousands of them were actually killed or destroyed. The Canadian government about a few years back actually made an official apology for this, but that was these were the Jesuits from France and England concluding this. Really, the tragedy in the cultures are amazing, but but in any case, these are the just quickly to look at the main features of these two in us. I, or capital S self, has to do with meaning, search for truth, love, beauty, and it is expressed in compassion, awareness, and sense of service or sense of unity. Whereas the lower self or ego or me has to do with fear, desire, gain, loss, survival, continuity, reward, punishment, exclusivity, approval, disapproval, knowledge, ignorance. So it's good for us, see, if you people are like me, I imagine that is the case, mostly one is occupied with the me, at least that's me, in my case true. But occasionally one does have a feeling of some connection with the other aspect in oneself.
Could I add to that? Right. I think me has to do with tomorrow and yesterday,
Yes, time also.
not now.
Time sequence is very much connected with getting richer. When we say that, that is already future is oriented in it, or that now I am richer or more important than I was earlier. And there is also, actually it's expressed even in the Yoga Sutras, a very specific, one of the sutras says, real knowledge is time free or free of time sequence. The Sanskrit word is kraman. What has happened to that young lady who seems to know the Indian tradition?
She left for India.
She's gone.
Ravindra, she has left to go to India.
Oh, she's already left.
Yeah.
Because some of these Sanskrit words that are used, and Guru, well, you would know, kraman literally means time sequence. So the Yoga Sutra actually says, so does the Bhagavad Gita, that real knowledge is free of time sequence. Let me remind you from the Gospels. Christ said, before Abraham was, I am. This is the 8th chapter of John's Gospel, if you're interested. I give you precise references for these things. The very next verse, they pick up stones to kill him, because he's obviously saying something completely stupid from their point of view. How can he be there before Abraham was? But from Christ's point of view, he could say, before Abraham was, I am. So that's the suggestion here. Then really for everybody to raise this question, if there are two in each one of us, I and me, then the question is, am I the I coming from above and which does not die when the me, which is the body-mind, dies? Or am I the me which will wholly vanish when the body dies? More than once I have said here, in every religious tradition, it gets said that the death of the body is not the death of the person. So the implication is that the person is not exclusively the body. But it's nice to say all this, one can keep quoting it, but do I actually feel this? Do I sense this? Do I therefore relate with what is true in me or what is real in me? Otherwise, it's all very nice to say that. And imagine that I will still be there hanging around even when the body is dead. But this is very much the suggestion in the spiritual traditions, that the spiritual side in me, that doesn't die. It's the body that dies. And this is from the last dialogue written by Plato. Phaedo is the name of the dialogue, where Socrates is about to die as he has been condemned to drink hemlock. One of his pupils asks him, in what way shall we bury you? Socrates said, in any way that you like, but you must get hold of me and take care that I do not run away from you. So is Socrates the body of Socrates? Or is Socrates The Greek word is demon, which is really more or less like spirit. Not demon, it's D-A-M-O-N in Greek, which more or less means spirit. So from Socrates' point of view, he's clearly expressing something completely different from what the people around him are wondering where they should bury him. So this is really a question to be raised again and again from our own perspective. Am I more and more connected with the spiritual side in me or with the material side in me? That's really the question again and again. And then they have of course, different needs, different approaches. But it is important to keep reminding, because in some religious traditions or even some spiritual undertakings, as if you can forget about the body. This is completely silly. Body is the instrument to get rid of the body or to let it deteriorate. How is this going to assist the evolution of the spirit? So again and again a reminder, the body is necessary. My body is needed to assist the evolution of the particle of divinity called my soul that has taken on my body for its purpose. This is a remark from Ishwar Krishna, one of the greatest sages in the Indian tradition. He is, just as Patanjali is regarded as the author of the Yoga Sutras, Ishwar Krishna is regarded as the author of Sankhyakarika, which is a whole school of philosophy in India. And in fact, most of the approach in the Bhagavad Gita is based actually on the kind of philosophy of Sankhyakarika, the language. So that's the important remark was Ishwar Krishna, that spirit without the body is lame, body without the spirit is blind. Some of you may know this. There was a remark that Einstein made. Many religious people are very happy about it and they often quote it. His remark is, this is Einstein's remark, religion without science is blind, science without religion is lame. Religion is understood by Einstein and in fact in the whole of the Abrahamic tradition, leading to appropriate action. Religion as understood in the Indian tradition is leading to clearer and clearer vision, clearer and clearer knowledge. So it's completely reverse of what Einstein is saying. In fact, in one of my articles, I take that remark and see how wrong Einstein actually is, or he's indicating a very limited understanding of religion. Let me quote that again. Einstein's remark is, science without religion is lame. It cannot act without religious people letting it act. He doesn't complete the whole sentence, but science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. Whereas Ishwar Krishna is saying just the opposite. Remark of Jean de Salzman, the general way the purpose or the deep impulse in all levels of reality gets expressed in spiritual teaching. That's not her remark. Her remark is quoted later on. The previous one is my remark. The general way the purpose or the deep impulse in all levels of reality gets expressed in spiritual teachings is that each level of existence is trying to evolve, as it were, to return home to the highest level, called God or Brahma or Absolute or many other names. Yesterday I quoted several remarks even from the Christian tradition. For example, Gospel of Philip, non-canonical, says Christ came not to make us Christians but to make us Christ. And I had quoted Saint Athanasius from the 2nd century, God became man so that man may become God. So, but generally in the Judeo-Christian tradition, this is not emphasized, or in fact is condemned, even heretical, if anybody, like Christ said, Father and I are one, is crucified. Same thing in Meister Eckhart said something fairly close to it, not exactly that remark. He said the soul is as infinite as God. He was excommunicated. Al-Halaj in the Islamic tradition said something very similar. He was also crucified, actually literally crucified. Yeah.
Robbie, remind me who said God becomes man so that man can become God.
Saint Athanasius.
Could you spell? Oh,
I think I had shown that yesterday. Athanasius. More or less correct.
thank you.
Second
And
century.
What century? Second. Thank you.
But those expressions are quite infrequent in the Judeo-Christian tradition. But then I had also actually quoted from Christ himself, saying he hopes that his disciples will become one as we are one, praying to God. And then this remark of Jean Sommer, there is an energy which is trying to evolve. That is why it comes into a body. If a person works and helps the evolution of this energy, at death this energy goes to a higher level. If one does not work, the energy returns to its own level, but the human life is wasted. Again, really putting it in obviously slightly different language, what I have been saying earlier, that the soul takes on the body so that the body can assist by its actions the evolution of the soul. And rather than using the word soul, here the word is used an energy which is trying to evolve. Partly because words like soul and spirit, everything has been so much rigmarole has been attached to this. So sometimes people like to use language a little free of these religious languages. And then constant reminder in all traditions, in of course different ways, to be more and more free of me, attachment to my own fears and desires. Now here I have quoted at least 3 different sources. Theologia Germanica, especially I remind my friends of Christian background, according to Martin Luther, a serious Christian needs to read only 3 books. Theologia Germanica is one of them, and Letter to the Romans by St. Paul, and Gospel of John. This is Martin Luther's remark. But most of my Christian friends haven't even heard about the Theologia Germanica. And then Ansari of Herat was a Sufi sage from the 16th century. So first of all, I should just read it. Nothing burns in hell except self-will. And then Ansari of Herat said, know that when you learn to lose yourself, you will reach the beloved. It's really only in the Sufi tradition and part of Krishna's tradition that God is referred to as the beloved. Generally, that's not.
I think John
John of the Cross.
Spain says.
John of the Cross.
He
Yes.
refers.
Yes, of the beloved. Know that when you learn to lose yourself, you will reach the beloved. There is no other secret to be learned, and more than this is not known to me. And then Christ in Matthew, I have quoted 2 or 3 times earlier. Unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. Sometimes, actually in other Gospels, remarks of Christ, similar remarks, but slightly more stronger actually, unless you die to yourself, or unless you die to the world. So it's expressed much more strongly, actually. Then always a recommendation from all the sages. Nobody is recommending ignorance, but don't get so stuck that you know. Don't get so stuck to your knowledge. This is a remark from the oldest Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, quoted later on in another Upanishad. Into great darkness they enter, those who worship ignorance. Into still greater darkness enter those who are addicted to their knowledge. Even the greatest scientists like Einstein or Newton actually said the more we get to know, we realize how little we know. So to get stuck to one's knowledge and therefore not be open to being surprised. Actually, in any spiritual experience, this is one of the measures whether the experience is real or slightly imaginary, or just one makes up something or imagines something, not necessarily makes up artificially. Unless there is a surprise, it is not real. Actually, one of the Upanishads, I don't remember the exact reference, I think it's Taittiriya Upanishad, which actually says, unless it is surprising, 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 it cannot be holy. This is even a very strong suggestion that whatever is really sacred will surprise you, because it does not fit into your knowledge. It doesn't fit into what you know. Also, I have quoted, this is the last day, so I am obviously re-quoting many of the things which have been said earlier as a kind of summarizing. An old Sufi saying, if you die before you die, you will not die when you die. I was pleasantly surprised to discover this also on St. Paul's Monastery on Mount Athos. And then another kind of a shift. We are not what we believe ourselves to be. I always say that I seek, but in reality I am sought. I do not know this enough. Something I could believe in is missing, something absolutely true that would be like new knowledge, a force that would prevail over my inertia. I need to have a force in me coming from a higher level of the cosmos. This is actually a very strong suggestion in several teachings, and one can even understand the logic behind it. If the soul has taken on my body, then it is rather interested in body actually doing the damn thing that it is supposed to do. So therefore it is eager to connect with the body. Since the body hasn't taken on the soul, so body may be just doing its own thing. So really this is exactly what she is saying here, that the spiritual side, I say that I am seeking, but in reality I am sought. The spiritual side is more eager to connect with me so that I can in fact do what I am supposed to be doing. The very energy of our real love is divine and is seeking itself. It is a particle of the divine in me which is seeking or loving the divine. We need to keep this in mind, because the bodily part in me is not eager to be connecting with the divine. It's the spiritual side in me which wishes to connect with the divine. There is a song that is sung in India and has become now the theme song of the Gurdjieff group in India. And this song, it says, "What strange game you are playing with me, O Lord. You are the one seated in my heart, and you're seeking yourself." But the part that needs to be emphasized, that the part of, if you like, part of God even, or part of the Spirit that is in my heart, it is at a level lower than the highest God. It is seeking, so in a way it is true that it is very much a part of God, but it is not. The reason why it is taking on the body so that it can actually evolve, so it can come back to the level of God. And I imagine in human history, maybe a dozen or 24 people may have actually come to that level, who could truly say the Father and I are one, or that I am Brahma. But I don't imagine it's an easy task. Then also useful to be reminded again and again, this is John of the Cross. By the way, I think I mentioned this earlier also here. There are thousands of saints for example, in the Roman Catholic tradition, but only 36 doctors. Doctor means one who is responsible for a doctrine. So John of the Cross is the doctor of mystical theology. And this is his remark, that it would be foolishness to think that the language of love and the mystical intelligence can be at all explained in words of any kind. For who can describe that which he shows to loving souls in whom he dwells? He is referring to God here. Who can set forth in words that which he makes them feel? And lastly, who can explain that for which they long? Assuredly, no one can do it, not even they themselves who experience it. The Buddha is unable to describe nirvana. Christ is unable to describe the kingdom of God. That is the reason why they use figures of special comparisons and similitudes. They hide somewhat of that which they feel, and in the abundance of the Spirit utter secret mysteries rather than express themselves in clear words. Just a reminder that the mysteries, real mysteries, can never be solved. Solved meaning now the mind has figured it out, can explain it to everybody. That's what people understand by solve. And repeated reference that the mind is too low, that there are many levels of reality far subtler than the mind. And Rabindranath Tagore, who I already mentioned, an amazing poet, and this is his last poem he wrote, just 13 days before he died. He wrote this actually in Bengali, that's his mother tongue, but I just give you English translation. In the beginning of my life, with the first rays of the rising sun, I asked, who am I? Now at the end of my life, with the last rays of the setting sun, I ask, who am I? So the mystery remains, but has an enormous impact on the one who is connected with this mystery. Certainly one can see this in the case of Tagore himself. But everybody then does. One of the important things really for a searcher is to come to a stage where one does not deny the mystery, but actually celebrates it. Then Bach writes music, Uday Shankar dances, Einstein does physics. But they don't deny the mystery. They do what they are good at doing. Tagore writes poetry. So it's important to really realize that it's not a question of solving the mystery, but certainly denying the mystery would be completely absurd, but really celebrating it and to allow the mystery to have action on one's life. And as I just mentioned, these 3 or 4, Michelangelo doing sculpture, Bach writing music, they would all speak about the mystery. Ultimately, the mystery is not solved by any of them. But of course, sculpture makers are not using words, musicians are not using words, so they don't necessarily use the same kind of words as Tagore used it, because he's a poet. Something that might amuse you, you see the spelling of his name, Ravindra, R-A-B-I, because he's from Bengal. The word actually comes from Sanskrit, Ravindra, R-A-V-I. Just to show to you my arrogance, I was hardly 11 or 12 years old. I wrote a letter to one of the well-known magazines saying, how is it that our well-known poet can't spell his name rightly? And my father thought this was such a stupid thing for me to do, but the magazine actually published that. Yes. So that just shows you my own arrogance. But
I guess you were destined to be published, Ronnie.
pardon?
We're destined to be published,
Yeah.
no matter what you say.
That's the trouble. That's why this person, the editor of Temenos, wanted to find all the proper references. Okay, really basically bringing now to a close, I wish to, first of all, let me mention something. Some of these things I have said several times. In our own search, and sometimes you can see this even in one meditation, if you carefully watch, there are three very clear stages. First stage is that of a warrior, doing the right thing, finding the right cushions, making sure that the light is proper, etc., or there is no more sound. Whatever one is doing, one is like a warrior. Then soon one comes to the stage of a lover, no longer struggling this or that. One is just naturally drawn to something subtle, something serious, something spiritual, something higher, whatever words you wish. Then the last stage, which is expressed experienced by me only rarely, but occasionally, one is the beloved, much more than that I am seeking God or connecting with something higher. That God is more eager to find me and bless me, touch me. So there are three different stages. And here I would now like to focus on this. I've chosen 5 words, all beginning with the letter A. So there are 5 A's. First one is acknowledgement, which is really opposite of refusal and denial. Deep acknowledgement of the distance between what I know and what I am. Unless one comes to this clarity, one keeps struggling to know this, know that, like a great warrior, more and more knowledge. Acknowledging that the so-called Ravi, in my case, will die, and wondering why he has been created. So when these questions actually become serious for one, but all that requires struggle inside, because other things are occupying my time, my attention, my energy. So one has to struggle to even make room for this. People often say, well, I don't have time to read this scripture or that scripture, or for meditation. One doesn't have time. So that's really what the warrior then has to do. The next stage is also of the warrior. Acceptance. The opposite is annoyance at the way it is. Accepting one's limitations and searching for a teaching that may help me to know something about the real. But the flame of truth does not always burn bright. If any of you actually have had a flame of truth, it doesn't always burn bright. At least I speak from personal experience here. I realize that I need help from fellow searchers, searching, questioning, accepting the way it is. Accepting that I cannot do it, but realizing that I have a part to play. How may I allow it to be done in me or through me? It's a whole shift. A warrior is eager to do it, grasp it, win it. But gradually a shift that takes place.
Ravi, would that also be considered the dark night of the soul, the acceptance part?
Say that again?
That light that doesn't always burn bright, is that our dark night of the soul?
Yes, well, the dark night of the soul actually arises, especially in the description given by John of the Cross, and also we see that in a great Indian text. But that arises having connected with the highest level. and then one is disconnected. That's the dark night of the soul. Here, that's not the level that I'm speaking about here. There's much before that. Then the third one is alignment of my body and mind towards the mysterious. Moving away from activity to receptivity. Initially, one is willing to do this and that, conquer something, achieve something, but then letting something to touch me. How can I become more and more receptive rather than active? Realizing that all tensions arise from my fear or from self-assertion. Allowing deeper and deeper relaxation, physical, emotional, and intellectual, and searching for the right posture and attitude that will allow subtle energies to enter and nourish my organism. It's a very different direction. Initially, one is, as I said, like a warrior trying to conquer something, to achieve something. Then one is more like a lover. Is willing to receive, willing to accept, willing to be touched. The next two A's, I did not find the English words, so they are Sanskrit words here, but they begin with A. Amani bhavam, which really stillness, literally it means thoughtlessness. Opposite as agitation. Now people, I know this has become very famous remark these days, mindfulness. Actually the Bhagavad Gita, and in fact you may be surprised even in Summa Theologica, the great Christian theologian, Summa Theologica, Aquinas. They actually says what is required is mindlessness, not mindfulness. I remind people of this. That is required is freedom from the mind. But so literally Amani Bhavam actually means thoughtlessness or mindlessness. This is regarded as the highest state in the Upanishads and also in the Summa of Thomas Aquinas. New language, new dimension, new reality. And then quote from the Bhagavad Gita, abandoning all desires born of selfish will and restraining completely the multitude of senses with the mind, one should slowly cease from all mental activity with awareness, buddhi, held firmly. Having fixed the mind in the self, one should think of nothing at all. Whenever and to whatever side the restless and unquiet mind wanders away, it should be reined in and brought back into subjugation to the self. Nothing is so easy, let me assure you, but these are the stages or the indication of the direction. Then can come Ananda, which basically means joy or delight. The fifth A is in a separate category. The other four A's are in a spiral of enhancement. The first two are preparation of a warrior, effort, struggle. The next two are natural expressions of a lover, accepting, receiving. Ananda belongs only to the beloved. And then you see these remarks both of Krishna and Christ several times in slightly different words get said. I reveal myself to those whom I love. Well, this is the last slide I'm going to show. This is Christ the Pantocrator. I think I had shown it once earlier. This is from the 6th century in St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt at the foot of Mount Sinai. This is where the burning bush that Moses saw. That monastery is actually, it includes that burning bush in it. And that is the oldest Christian monastery still continuing in the same building. And it has literally hundreds, or I would even say thousands of completely remarkable paintings. This is my most favorite painting of Christ, the representation of Pantocrator. Doesn't that strike people? I mean, I think it's absolutely amazing.
And he's holding a book.
Holding the book, yeah. Trying to teach us jokers who don't really know a bunch. So this is, in any case, I just wanted you to see it before we finish. I remember that it is not my breath that is keeping me alive. As I have more than once quoted from the book of Genesis, it's the breath of God that is keeping us alive. So pay a little attention to the breath. But not holding your breath outside or inside, but simply as I pay attention to it, it naturally deepens. Remaining as relaxed as possible, because if you seriously look at yourself, all my tensions arise either from fear or self-assertion. And it is also helpful to find a posture that allows energies to move in the body without being restricted. Essentially, a verticality without rigidity. And if my eyes were open, I should be able to look horizontally. Essentially, connecting with the two of the great commandments. Verticality, connecting me with something subtler than my usual self. Horizontal, needing, wishing to take care of people at my own level. Without getting too literal-mindedly, but to realize that breathing in as if these subtle energies enter into me through my skull. The last opening to close after the birth of a baby is at the top of the skull, thereby creating a barrier between subtler energies and our usual energies. So as if I am breathing in subtle energy through my skull. And as I breathe out, I place it in the whole of my body. And if any of you have any of your own prayers or a wish for a prayer, for example, with something very simple. Breathing in, you could internally say, Lord. Breathing out, you could say, have mercy. but staying a little bit in contact with the breath. Or choose whatever words speak to you. It doesn't have to be that. Personally, for me, what I actually usually use, breathing in, maintainer of eternal wisdom. Breathing out, bless me with truth, love, and joy. But choose your own words that speak to you. Again, a reminder not to hold your breath outside or inside, and remaining as relaxed as possible. Really more or less allowing myself to be blessed. Of course, now our gathering is not really here for meditation, so take 3 more breaths and then please bring whatever questions or insights you wish to bring.
I find one of the biggest challenges to let go of is like and dislike. Is it enough to stand back and just have it be witnessed? And will that fall away in time?
No, I think that can be very helpful, but sometimes a kind of struggle is needed. So I see what it is, something that I don't like, and then to say, now I'm going to like it, damn it or not, then to see what is it that actually interferes in me.
Let's take an example.
Yes.
Putin has been elected for 6 more years. I'm
Yes.
supposed to like that?
No, but here, as I said, to be actually, what you need, at least from my perspective, it doesn't matter whether I like him or I don't like him. What is required from my side is actually to be a little free of all these interactions or waste of energy on my side.
Detach.
That's right.
Detachment.
But in order to be free of that, even if something about Putin that you have heard or you can even imagine, which may be possibly good, that maybe he's a strong man. So it doesn't have to be admiring in the sense that whatever nonsense he's doing is a good thing. But it's really more a question of not changing him. Whatever I might do is not going to change him. It's really being free of my own reactions internally so that I'm not wasting my energy on this. So in a way, or whatever else assists you, personally for me, if I can think even remotely something possibly likable about him, it sort of undoes my dislike or like.
Or could one just accept that this is the way the world is and has always been?
But really our friend David was saying yesterday, not because that can also lead to kind of an indifference in us. But if there is anything you can do or I can do, which may even be possibly assisting or possibly maybe voting for somebody who you think would do something useful or contributing some funds to some agency, These are external measures, but so to do whatever I can possibly do, but to imagine that I can control Putin is completely crazy.
Well, that's obvious.
Yeah.
But this thing of like and dislike, it seems
To be free
find
of that is
different
required,
forms,
yes.
and it'd be
Yeah.
wonderful to be completely
Yeah.
One of your earliest slides talked about the debt. The debt, we owe a debt to.
Yes.
What, 4 or 5 things. And to me that implies some sort of payment, and perhaps the spiritual work that we're talking about is some form of that in a roundabout way, but I'm not drawing a very good connection of how we pay those debts.
Well, again, I think, for example, debt to the society is one of the debts. So, is there anything I can do helpful for the society? Now, society maybe overall I can't necessarily attend to 8 billion people, even just my neighbor. Or if there is anything that I can do, that will be paying some debt. Similarly to the parents, honoring them, respecting them, etc. So I think, in a way, whenever we receive these kind of remarks from any of the scriptural material, we just need to see how it applies to me. What can I possibly do here? And then, for example, debt to the god. The Sanskrit word is devas. It's very difficult to translate. It sometimes gets translated angels, sometimes gods, etc. But basically, there is also an internalization that ultimately, certainly from the Indian perspective, all the gods or devas, even the highest, is ultimately in me. So debt to my inner self will be debt to the gods. Finding occasions to be actually aware of what deep down I need or wish, what calls me to be alive, and then do I actually correspond to it in any manner, that would be paying debt to the sage. Similarly, sages, as I said, sages have brought wonderful teachings, but none of us, at least in my understanding, can be familiar with all the sages, and it's just too much, too much work. But whosoever either we accidentally happen to be, if I am born in India, I'm naturally, incidentally just drawn attention to some of the Indian sages. If you're born here, you would naturally hear something that Christ said or what was said in the Old Testament, etc. So that is more natural. But sometimes, these days especially, one can be familiar with sages anywhere because of the communication. So whosoever calls you, not every sage speaks. For example, I could quote to you many remarks of Christ, but not all his remarks strike me equally. Some of them call me more than the others. Similarly, the remarks of Krishna or the Buddha, not everything strikes equally, at least to me. So whatever strikes one, how does one then actually try to respond to it? Will be paying debt to the sages. Yes?
Diane, you can unmute. Go ahead.
Raviji, when you mentioned at the beginning about the 5 debts, it made me think of the idea of original sin that we are supposedly born with in the Christian tradition. Is there a correlation between those ideas?
Yes. If in a way one could say that, for example, in the Indian tradition, the general notion is that everybody is in the bondage of one's own like and dislike, and how to be free of that. So that is, to some extent, I feel the description in the Christian tradition about original sin, which applies to everybody, is really describing the general human situation. And that gets described, for example, in Buddhism, that in general most of us are asleep, but we could wake up. And in the traditional Vedantic tradition, it gets described that we live in Maya or in illusion, but we can live in reality. So from that point of view, if you look at original sin as a kind of a description of our ordinary human situation, you can then find corresponding remarks in every teaching. I think yesterday I had mentioned that some of the commentaries. For example, in modern times, Krishnamurti would say we are all being driven wholly by thought, but we can connect with intelligence beyond thought. Or Gurdjieff would say we are living very mechanically like a machine, but we could live more consciously. So the same thing is expressed as a general feature and a possibility. And then I had also said yesterday, they not only point out how one could live, or how one should live, but they actually show. Otherwise we won't actually follow these sages unless they actually demonstrate that it is possible to live the way they are suggesting. If Krishnamurti says to live from intelligence beyond thought, but we don't get any feeling of him living from that level, we would never follow him. Similarly, Christ actually demonstrated how to love one's enemies even, or one's neighbor. So these sages are not only describing what we should do, but they actually demonstrate that it is possible to do it, not just a good idea. So, but that you'll find in every tradition.
Teresa?
Where is Teresa?
Oh, Teresa, can you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a question?
Oh, you just unmute, okay. No, I was wondering about the midline that you were talking about, the two centers of the alignments that comes together in that still point in the meditation. Do you mind just sharing a little bit more about that?
Oh, well, from my perspective, that almost corresponds to the two great commandments, to love God and to love your neighbor. Personally, I feel, but don't just simply buy it. You can see if you're sitting in meditation, if you put your head like this, it actually interferes with your breathing. Or if you put your head like that, it also interferes with your breathing. So I'm suggesting to you to maintain a horizontality of your head, but if you were actually looking, or if your eyes are open, don't look straight. You could sort of look slightly downwards, but keep the position, the posture of the head needs to be verticality as well as horizontality.
Okay. I thought you were talking about something in reference to the brain, but thank you for the clarification.
No, but you can, as I said, anything I say or anybody says, it's always good to actually see how it applies to me in practice. Many wonderful things are said by the Buddha or by Christ, but unless I see how it applies to me, I can just happily keep quoting them, writing papers and publishing this or that. That's not going to do anything for me. Yeah.
Would you say that the vertical and the horizontal meet in the heart? That's where they intersect.
Sorry, say that again?
The vertical and the horizontal intersect in the heart. Would you say that? What's your take on that?
Well, the heart, I think more than once I have said here that really feeling is the first avenue to truth in any case. So therefore, generally it gets said. And also, actually, even the scientists, biologists are now discovering that there are more neurons actually around the heart than around the brain. So traditionally, particularly in the Indian tradition, much more emphasized that whatever we mean by higher consciousness in us or higher level is centered around the heart. But I think in every teaching, very strong emphasis that we first of all get a feeling for something. We may be even unable to describe it to anybody, what we have heard or what we have felt or sensed. Because description requires a certain language, then the mind begins to enter into it. And the moment the mind enters, it also immediately wants to bring what is the contrary to this. This is it's just the nature of the mind, which is why so much emphasis again and again to be a little free of the mind or mental. As I quoted, Amani Bhavam, one of the A's, fourth A. Anybody else wishes to?
Just a thought. thought that came to my mind. You had the slide that talked about the mystery, and do not deny the mystery, but celebrate it. And I love that because I think that sort of gives, it's not an easy answer, but it does give a way of looking at when you're going through a difficult time, is to be able to step back from it and be in that mystery of, well, what will unfold in front of me? Where will this take me? And sort of know that in that mystery you're still connected to something.
Yes.
It's not that you're disconnected.
No, I think this is, not everybody describes these things, but whenever either a great scientist or a poet, or for example, Michelangelo, I described one of the remarks he made. He said, I saw an angel in the rock, and I chiseled and chiseled until I revealed him. This is one of his remarks, and Michelangelo. So, but as I said, usually painters, sculptors, they are not using words, so often it's difficult to therefore quote them. But poets, scientists, philosophers, they would sometimes use words, and it's sometimes easier to quote them there. And whenever they have quoted, for example, Einstein or Newton or Bach even made this remark on one occasion. Tagore I quoted already. So for them the mystery still remains, even though their works of art are able to even invite us to touch with something mysterious, which is why we call them great poets or great artists. But the mystery still remains for them, and they don't deny it or anything, but celebrate it in whatever way they can do. Bach is not doing physics, Einstein is not writing poetry, but they do what they are good at. So we need to see for each one of us whatever is the best that we can attend to express that mystery. Anybody else wishes to? Yes, Karen.
I was just going back to what Catherine was talking about earlier, and I was wondering if you can recall, or because I can't recall it. It's a Yoga Sutra, and excuse me for loosely translating it, but it seems like it's, for what we want to come with ease, we must first do a diligence. And it seems that that's the case for our asana practice, our meditation, our work in scripture, and it just feels like a lovely direction point to the work that's required from us to get the body and the mind in line for receiving something more subtle than ourselves.
No, I mean that's, in any case, not only a general suggestion, but it's very helpful, useful suggestion that whatever one is engaged with, to try to do it as well as one can, with as much excellence as one can, and that, but not to imagine that that is the end. Yeah. Always allow the possibility that there is more than I now know, or more than I now practice or I understand. Always not imagining that I have come to the final place in the cosmos. And yes?
I'm wondering, a few days ago you spoke about something about the state of the world, I can't remember what, but I'm wondering whether you feel that there's any sort of progress that humanity makes over all these hundreds of years that we fighting each other and trying to have democracy, and do we make any progress, or do we just keep making things a mess?
Well, I think that in general there is a tendency for practically all politicians and everybody that things are changing and we are making progress. Personally, from my understanding, I don't get the impression that we are making progress, But that doesn't mean, this was something helpful actually brought by David yesterday, that doesn't mean that I therefore need to become indifferent to doing whatever I can possibly do. And what I can do to then imagine that whatever I do is now going to change the quality of humanity. Even the Buddha didn't succeed in doing this, the Christ didn't succeed in doing this. And I was invited by the Krishnamurti Foundation to speak last Saturday. I said, if you look at, he was born in 1885 and died in 1986. Did the humanity change? We have First World War, Second World War. So to fantasize that even these great sages were able to change the quality of humanity. Of course, people in their presence, some people I am sure were absolutely changed by their presence. And so it is true that they obviously, why we would even bother to call them great sages, because their presence brings about a radical shift in some people. And then each one of us, I think I've said this more than once, each one of us is receiving vibration, the whole of our body is receiving vibration and emanating vibration. And in the presence of every human being, there is something is being emanated from them, and sometimes they emanate a sense of goodwill, sense of love, compassion, and some people just their presence. In fact, I just give you a personal example. This was many, many years ago. 1967, I was teaching yoga postures. Some elderly looking gentleman walked in after more or less towards the end of the class. And suddenly there was a very strange kind of feeling in the whole room. Later on we tried to understand who this man was, and he had just escaped from a mental hospital. We had no idea of this, but his presence had an enormous shift in the whole atmosphere. But of course, these are slightly extreme cases, but each one of us is emanating vibration. And I have mentioned more than once here, personally for me, Jean the Salesman or Krishnamurti, two people whose name you have heard many times already. I had heard them so often, I could practically quote what they're going to say next. But why would I bother to go there? Because in their presence, there was a different vibration. At least temporarily, it lifted even a joker like me. I felt something internally different in their presence. So I think each one of us is radiating vibrations of some kind or the other. In somebody's presence, you feel quieter or more deeply, innerly searching, and sometimes just more agitation. But each one of us is reading wave, are also receiving. It's not just radiating. Yeah.
I couldn't help but, during the years I lived in India, I heard this quote. You probably know it, and I'd love to hear your, expand on it. But for those who want to change the world, it's a little like holding the tail of a dog. As long as you hold it, it's straight. That stuck with me.
I don't remember the Sanskrit version of it, so I can't. But it's a good reminder that it's not easy to change the dog. The tail will again come back to
We
its.
can change ourselves, but not the world. That was
Yeah.
I think Swami Vivekananda often repeated that. That's one possible source
really?
that people may have heard it.
Yeah.
The world is like a dog's curly tail, and you can straighten it, but when you let go, it'll go right back again.
Thank you. I'm wondering.
But on the other hand,
I'm not sure he was the origin of it,
I
but
have his
yes,
picture.
and he liked that. He said that, yes.
But on the other hand, it is also true that at least at the time when you're holding the tail, something does shift a little bit. So we don't need to therefore resign or to give up. We need to do whatever we can do. But to imagine that even, as I just said, even Christ or the Buddha, they could not possibly radically change the whole world. So to fantasize that we can radically change the whole world is one can imagine whatever, but
But just the idea of wanting to change the whole world, isn't that somewhat egoic? Is it any different than someone else wanting to conquer another civilization or, you know, that, which creates wars? I mean, so what's the difference between the two? Even if it's for a good intention, it's still ego. Correct?
yeah, no, but don't be against the ego. Sometimes the ego wants to do good work. Sometimes it egotist. See the word ego, as I have quoted more than once, its origin is from Latin and Greek. The word ego simply means I or self. But then, since the beginning of the 20th century, it has been more or less completely associated with egotism, the most negative side of the self. But ego can sometimes be selfless. I'm sometimes actually almost amazed at my own action, which surprises me that, my goodness, did I actually do it? But so ego, don't be against the word ego. It has many levels. But even something coming from my ego can be helpful, but it can also be harmful. There is no question about that. So how does one judge it carefully? Some people who have contributed to maybe many charities or something, or somebody, especially in the winter, there are many homeless people. Even countries like USA, I mean, these are rich countries, but you have homeless people. So if somebody can then give them some place to stay for the night, etc., it's helpful. It may even be coming from, if you like, ego, that I want to do good so that I can get to heaven. Maybe even from that, it is still a helpful result. Yeah.
Can you relate this concept to the comment by Madame de Salzman that you were talking about earlier about the energy that's trying to evolve? Because it seems like we're talking about changing the world and trying to make things better on the material plane, and so that's like the horizontal. But at the same time, there's this verticality of this energy that's trying to evolve that she's talking about. And if it's the particle of divinity trying to make it back to itself, are they really that independent? Or are these two things that are happening sort of independently, or don't they, because they come together in us, don't they have some sort of interplay? And is there a particle of divinity that cares about changing the world? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure. Whether changing the world or primarily really changing oneself, which then has its effect on the world. This is really almost a very fundamental difference. Much of the scientific, technological enterprise has become externally oriented. Spiritual enterprise is internally oriented, but both of them have consequences on each other. So whatever I now am, supposing in the next year something changes in me towards something better, so then whatever I would then say would come out slightly differently. But if it changes towards something worse, that will also come out differently. So it might then even have some influence on the people around me. So these things, whatever happens inside me does have an external influence. Similarly, external things are having influence on me internally. So these two can't be wholly separated. But the call from the spiritual traditions is really to pay attention more and more inside, what is taking place inside me. How can that be transformed? They are not against doing something good in the world. I mean, that would be completely surprising. But strictly speaking, that goodness in the world needs to emerge out of their shift in their quality of being. I think we need to come to a stop here. Thank you very much for putting up with me.
want to thank all of you for coming. All of you online, I should look at the cameras and not the screen. It's been really a wonderful 2.5 weeks. And as Ravi mentioned, we're planning ahead for next March. And do you want to say a little about what you talked about?
Well, what I had, that's at least at present, I'm thinking of what we would speak about next time. How actually to put into practice some of these teachings. That's the overall theme. And my intention is, out of 11 days here, 2 days I will choose something from the remarks of Christ. For example, even something that I have quoted so often, unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. And then focus on, I'll take maybe 2 or 3 remarks of Christ to focus on how do we actually practice it. Then a couple of days to choose some remarks of the Buddha, a couple of days from Bhagavad Gita, a couple of days from Yoga Sutras. And then if we still have 2 or 3 more days, take some of the contemporary sages like Madame Blavatsky, Krishnamurti or Gurdjieff. How do we actually put this in practice? So we'll take some of the remarks. Some of them are actually commonly expressed by all of them. For example, emphasis on impartial self-study. That's, each one of the sages requires that. So I can't keep focusing on that the whole time, but at least once I'll definitely focus on this. So some things are common, but some things are slightly differently expressed, and it'll be helpful to stay with them. That's the intention.
Anyway, it sounded wonderful to me. And one of the things that's happening with our school and even online is that the presentations are becoming more interactive, more inward focused, and a little bit more intense in the ways we study together, so that there's a little bit more time for sharing, for quiet. I am part of just began working with a study group in town that's working with the Tao Te Ching, and it is, the discussions are so different. It's like a free-for-all, with people interrupting each other, all enthusiastic, all wonderful, very interested, very engaged, but there's no silence. It's constant, one after another talking, and it will take some, I think it will happen if our group gels eventually, but the facilitator is one of these who is, don't raise your hands, just speak. and that's difficult. But in any event, what you have come into is our community, as well as our being a center for international work. And every time you come, we welcome you very warmly. It's so good to have you here, and especially Ravi for so long. Then we get to have some of you here for longer times, and even coming and going doesn't interrupt the continuity of the energy that we've built together. So I love it when you come. The quality of the questions is always, I think, wonderful. And then we have an exchange, and we grow together. So we look forward to next year, and in between time, you're teaching online.
Yes, several. If you go on my website, there are, for example, the Theosophical Society of America has invited me to give 4 webinars in April on 4 Saturdays. And so there are several people here there invite me. So, but by the way, I should say today it was Karen Kelly who instructed me to initially begin with a few quiet moments.
What was an instruction?
But I hope it was helpful.
Yes, and you know how helpful it is, even when we begin our meetings and close them with a little quiet time. There's something then that happens within us and brings us a little better together, and just a moment or two of leaving everything else behind and being present for one another. So we thank Ananya and Annie in the back, of course, all of those who have others who have helped. Adele is bringing us things for tea. Others of you who have baked little things or brought them, thank you so much to make our tea table always excellent. And again, thank you so much. Oh, and thank you for your mobilizing for the, I am not a mobilizer. So I needed somebody to say, everybody to the front. But thank you all for everything that you bring to make these places, things wonderful for us.